The morning was still early. The sky was still not entirely blue. Bare trees in the autumn swayed gently in the chilly wind as they lined Summit Ridge. NPR inside the sub played softly and peacefully, making me feel drowsy. At 38, Lena Whitaker was holding a steel. She adjusted her coat belt with one hand, while holding a coffee mug in the other. She was accustomed to getting started before her colleagues, a combination of instinct and discipline. She would rather stay away from the kind of stares in the morning that said, "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Without using words, she drove her black SUV through a deserted intersection. Red and blue suddenly in her mirrors, lights came on. Lena calmly stopped, her hands steady, her eyes, however, narrowed. No red light had been run by her. She wasn't driving too fast. No one else on the road, no phone, and no infraction. The cop and her alone, the window lowered. The air blue and cold. The approximately 40-year-old white officer leaned into the picture wearing sunglasses and giving someone a critical look. "Good morning, license and registration, please." Slowly, she passed them over with her right hand. He hardly looked at them, then inquired, "What has led you to this particular neighborhood?" "Too early?" Lena pretended not to understand, tilting her head slightly. "Traveling to labor, why?" He was not pleased with the response. "We've recently experienced some unusual traffic in this area. People typically don't cut through Summit Ridge unless they have a plan. This is where you reside." She did November. She worked for an agency he couldn't imagine and lived nearby. Within her silver ring whirled once in her palm, a silent coping mechanism. She had been dragged more than 3 times this year, each time with a different justification. However, the reason was always the same. She was familiar with this game. Respond too quickly. She is in hiding. Something. Become irritated. She is combative. Keep quiet. She doesn't cooperate. She said slowly. "I'm headed to the federal building on West 48th. An elevatibro, his eyes scanning the entire body. Why would anyone want to hire her? Lena looked him in the eye. There was only a steely stillness, no fear, no response. Would it be okay if I looked inside the car? That query, apparently innocent, was the start of an error he was unable to reverse. Whitaker, Lena did not take immediate action. The question lingered in the cool morning air. Would you mind if I looked inside the car? Actually, it wasn't a request. It was a test of his endurance, his fear, and his ability to get away with something before Semyonia birthed. She sat motionless as she turned to face him. Is there a lawful, why is there a search? She inquired, deliberate but not defiant. She was aware of the script more skillfully than he did. The cop's mouth tightened. He wasn't prepared for her to speak with such ease in the language of right. He glanced at the back seat behind her, then back at her face as though searching for an explanation that hadn't yet occurred. His response was, "Just routine. We've been asked to watch for anything out of place because of the recent spate of carjackings, you know." "Carjackings," Lena said, almost grinning. There was always some ambiguity. There's always something that sounded soft enough to vanish if pressed, but formal enough to stand up in court. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Mounted covertly close to the dashboard of her car, since the sirens turned on, a federally issued dash cam had been recording. Her hands had not touched a something. Standard procedure for her and other internal investigators. No abrupt movements, don't bargain. Just get the facts. As it stands, when Lena worked in the Bureau's Office of Internal Responsibility, which is where it believes no one is looking, investigating wrongdoing, frequently in law enforcement, was her responsibility. She examined body cam gaps, camera footage, and policy infractions hidden in documentation. She had been constructing cases against officers who appeared to be just similar to the one that is currently outside her window. A few had been endearing. Most had acted carelessly. They all thought no one was looking. However, Lena wasn't merely observing. She was filming. She wasn't here by chance, either. Today she was en route to the federal building for a confidential meeting. Ironically, growing responsibility in precincts in the suburbs. She gazed up at the policeman, but as if her silence were a personal slight, she stood there. "If you'd like to issue a citation," she replied, said at last. Her tone was even, almost formal, as she said, "I'd be happy to contest it formally," soft but steel underneath. The officer took a step back, uncertain but irritated. He had no idea what to do. He could escalate the call. Back up, say she didn't cooperate, or he could ignore it and act like it never happened. Occurred. He held his hand close to his radio. She saw it, mentally noted it, remained silent. Then, without haste or threat, she reached down and pressing a tiny, flat button under the steering column with the thumb. A quiet bureau systems received a direct ping. Nothing ostentatious, just atom a stamp, a place, and an indication that something had gone wrong. And back it had just been delivered to someone at headquarters. Lena sat motionless for several more seconds, allowing her to catch her breath. Her cup holder was empty of coffee. Lukewarm, unaltered by the flashing lights behind her. She held on to her thumb. Out of calculation, not fear, close to the panic button. It wasn't the first time. She had to consider the situation, knowing when to talk and when to wait. When to gently remind someone that she wasn't just a figure in the control panel. She looked at herself in the side mirror. Behind her, the patrol car remained motionless. With no backup or second officer yet, he was still choosing the event for this morning. Lena was not prepared by her training for such street encounters. Her instincts were razor sharp, but not directly sharp. She interviewed more than 50 officers who had been suspended for misbehavior. She had committed the pacing, the tightening jaw, the micro-patterns, and thecketed language that always preceded bad choices. Deanley did not frighten her, not at all. She was terrified of what he stood for. The casual entitlement and the blame that is placed on skin, the idea that authority didn't have to defend itself prior to speech when Noon was observing. Haley retreated to his car and pretended to look over her paperwork. Theater 1 was performed every day, hidden from view, and he hadn't even typed anything into his in-car. Terminal. Unopposed. He tapped her SUV's trunk as though checking for flaws. Lena's eyes narrowed. Offhand, that tap, territorial, was precisely the type of information that, although it would never be mentioned in reports, was crucial to someone, focusing. She was called Agent Whitaker inside the federal building. Her name sat on the reports that were sent to Washington. She oversaw ethics and policy reviews, conformity. She approved disciplinary measures for officers warmed themselves with their badge. None of that mattered out here, though. She was dark. She was by herself. She also lived in the incorrect zip code. She recalled a hearing 2 months ago. A young police officer from a nearby precinct stood up for an unwarranted pause by stating that she didn't look appropriate. That was it. 4 words. Not appropriate. It only required that. Now, Rayleigh went back to her window with aiding of arrogant confidence. He claimed that everything appeared to be clean, but did not yet return her license. Just exercising caution with the very thing that has recently been in the news. Lena's tone remained steady. You halted without reason. That isn't being cautious. Profiling is what that is. He became agitated. I just want to maintain the community, ma'am. Secure. She had heard that line 100 times. The word safe was what they used to defend authority. Silence meant safety. Obedience was necessary for safety. Additionally, when someone sensed she didn't exactly follow their expectations, safety was used as an excuse to intensify. She said, "You've seen my ID," in a tone that's colder now. "I've registered with you." "You have visually inspected my car, I advise you to return my license unless you intend to submit a report." He paused. It was a moment too long. His power was gradually eroding. Quietly, but Lena sensed it. This is the result of a system built on someone who is more knowledgeable about the rules than the enforcers is encountered by instinct. Then he looked into the back seat once more. As though he was trying to regain control, he pointed to a black, hard-shell briefcase next to her laptop bag and asked, "What's in the case?" "Documents," she replied. Then he raised an eyebrow and said, "May I take a look?" She confronted it with quiet. Beyond this stop, there was a sense of tension. It was historic and institutional. She had learned from her father as a teenager what should she do if she gets stopped? Her sibling hadn't been that fortunate. An arrest had resulted from a minor citation. That arrest had evolved into a permanent record, legal fees, and 2 years of lost college. That's what infuriated her. Not because it's inconvenient or disrespectful, but because this was not an error. This was a trend. Her quiet was more audible than rage. Rayleigh moved his weight once more. Where did you claim to be employed? I didn't. One more lengthy beat. He then returned her license. Okay, he said, but no one apologized, just let out a breath. Be careful when driving. She grabbed the license and placed it lift without saying thank you. Lena did not speed as she pulled off the shoulder dot away. She drove deliberately and slowly. Allowing his car to appear smaller in the mirror, she was aware that he was observing. He and other men watched until they were unable to no longer. She reached the parking garage beneath the federal building 5 minutes. Later. Construction, she was immediately recognized by the gatekeeper. Good morning, Agent Whitaker, she said. She felt her shoulders as the gate rose. Start to loosen up a bit, but the pressure didn't go away entirely. Not yet. She parked, turned off the car, and sat quietly in the SUV. She grabbed her phone and launched the secure recording app connected to the internal system of the Bureau. She posted the footage from the interaction, classified it as a suburban unjustified stop. Precinct 6A, a note was added. The subject displayed resistance and failed to cite a valid reason. Dash cam footage is continuously active for procedural clarity. In the report, she didn't have to be upset. All she needed was for it to exist, since the truth wasn't always loud. At times it merely waited, recorded, ready, filed, and dated. Lena had no intention of bringing up the stop. Seldom did she. Such encounters had a way of lingering in the background, too frequent to be reported, too minor to provoke outrage. However, the way the officer smirked and said, "Drive carefully," as if he still stayed with her longer than necessary and had the final say. She was carrying it, accompanied her through the security doors and up the lift to the glass-walled meeting room where 3 other agents were in the process of waiting. She took a seat, turned on her laptop, and displayed the file. The time-stamped video clip had already been uploaded, synchronized with her ID. The initial turning point was not Lena's experience, but Ruther's actions she took with it. She sent the video at 8:06 a.m. to Deborah Clean, special agent in charge, with a brief message. Monitoring field event. Make a review suggestion. Potential pattern similarity. Deborah was tough, shrewd, and most importantly, white. It took her less than 5 minutes to respond. I'll report this to the supervisor. Are you all right? Lena answered. I'm all right. Simply exhausted. It wasn't a lie. Nor was it the whole truth. By midday, the Bureau's internal affairs staff had learnt of it. Not due to Lena created a stir, but because her stop was similar to 2 others involving black people from the same precinct, drivers in or close to Summit Ridge who are professionals. Not one had lodged a formal complaint. They had all been captured on comparable dash cams, but Lena's situation was different. That changed when she became one of theirs. Everything. Lena had no control over the second point of shift. Deanley was unaware that his innocuous pause would soon land on the desk of someone who exceeded all of the supervisors to whom he had ever reported. At approximately 1:30 p.m., he got a formal notice to contact from a Bureau liaison asking for clarification concerning a federal agent's morning stop. He was instructed to provide a written report in a day. He didn't panic at first. He believed he could describe it as a misread situation or a routine patrol. However, after he logged and entered the portal and discovered that Lena Whitaker's plate's timestamp matched, his stomach churned. Somewhere he had heard her name, then it dawned on him. A departmental memo on racial bias had quoted her. Procedures. Before he sat down to write the report, he paced for 15 minutes. He was truthful. He omitted the incorrect neighborhood comment, but not entirely. He skipped over the part regarding requesting to search her car without a warrant. He described her as composed, uncooperative, and that because of the rise in local crime, he thought it wise to evaluate her presence. It was a textbook. He believed that the cover language was vague enough to avoid repercussions. The third thing to note about shift occurred when the video was shown out loud. Tone Tom at 410, the Bureau's Internal Review Board convened in private. Although Lena wasn't present, her tone was cool, even abrasive. Though like a quiet bullet, the words, "That's not caution. That's profiling." The pause when she wouldn't open the briefcase, the moment he tapped the trunk, the invitation to peek inside briefly. The review board remained silent as they observed. Not because it wasn't, but because the video was dramatic. It was standard procedure, and it was worse because of that. They witnessed the transition of power from implicit authority to deliberate self-control. Lena never spoke loudly. She never shouted off her badge. She didn't have to. Her refusal, her silence, and her presenchero followed the predetermined script. Her weapons were those. The board created 3 500 cum decisions. They would first conduct a formal audit of Deanley's stop, the previous 12 months' history. They would then inform the precinct commander of an ethics review in progress. Thirdly, they advise utilizing Lena's video in a fresh training course. Practical bias, identifying the subtle patterns. It was not until the following morning that Lena learned of any of it. When Debra gave her a sealed folder when she got to her office, there was a memo inside marked internal action as confidential. Her name was listed as field contributor and provided specifics on the suggestions that the oversight panel accepted. There was Oraton by hand. You made the correct decision. Silence is important. As well. Lena remained expressionless. She didn't feel like she had one. She felt somewhat measured, perhaps heavier, but not by itself. She walked to the door after leaving the folder on her desk. Window underneath. People were crossing streets and buses were moving slowly through the city, nothing noteworthy, just bikes swerving between cars and hissing to a stop. However, for the first time in a long time, Lena gave herself permission to think that perhaps, just perhaps, the correct silence could make a difference. Ultimately, it began with a video, but that wasn't all. 1 week following the Lena stop video as submitted, a pattern was identified by an internal analytics team. Identical precinct, same time of day, same neighborhood. The officers were transformed. The justifications changed, however. The targets hardly ever did. Black drivers were stopped, particularly women, more frequently in the vicinity of Summit Ridge than in any other part of the city. And no one was arrested during any of those stops. None turned up illegal items, but all of them were recorded as preventative. The term preventative had turned into a shield. On her screen, Lena saw the numbers mount up. They didn't yell. They muttered. A silent, damning buildup of unbridled power. Her situation wasn't unusual. It was normal. That was the actual risk. She sent the report along with a brief note to Deputy Director Ramos. This has nothing to do with regarding culture. Ramos answered, face to face. He visited her workplace twice. Later, he leaned against the doorframe as though he had too many choices to make, and she looked up and said, I need you to brief Justice. You mean the DOJ? He gave a nod. He continued to point to the report and said, and not just on your case, on this. Luminous on her screen. Lena realized then that this was no longer a sidebar. This was turning into a legless case file. The Justice Department planned a briefing on private policy. Lena wasn't by herself. The mistake 2 additional agents were sent by the committee, one specializing in procedural equity and the other in behavioral analysis. They took seats in 4 federal attorneys are seated across from a long wooden table in a beige room, an aliasin for civil rights. Lena took them through all of the video, not just her own. 2 more clips appeared. Same language, different officers, and comparable exchanges. You don't appear to be from this area. Just to be safe, there have been break-ins. She allowed him between clips. The silence does the talking. Then she arrived at the stop of the precinct. Heat maps of the population superimposed on history. There was no question about the difference. It was mathematical. One of the lawyers leaned in. EO was never informed of this. No official grievances. Lena said. However, the majority of people who are stopped in this way, they don't gripe. All they want is to return home. Something was written on her by the DOJ representative, legal pad. There was silence for a while. Lena went on. This isn't about bad apples, she stated in a steady tone. The environment is what tells. No one will ever rot those apples. They posed intelligent queries, regarded in policy, training, and models of supervision. Lena responded to each by using the quiet authority of a person who has spent years hearing men's justifications for thought they were exempt from the rules. The liaison got up at the conclusion of the meeting and declared, "We'll be issuing a suggestion to all suburban departments with comparable metrics, not just that precinct." Lena gave a nod. Something lifted in her chest, but she didn't smile. The Bureau's internal ethics panel released a memo that same week. Every officer in areas designated for demographic inequalities would have to go through required review that was influenced in part by Lena's video. She once recorded on the federal government now used the isolated act of self-preservation as training material. Officer Deanley's file was reopened in the interim. 5 earlier stops, each one earlier dismissed, were currently being reviewed formally. The policeman who once grinned at suddenly Lena's self-control was providing answers to questions he was unable to ignore. However, it was more than just a bureaucratic shift. It was cultural. Emails started coming in for Lena. Quiet ones from dispatchers, officers, and other agents. Observe the instruction vide. Thank you. It wasn't until I watched it back that I realized how awful it looked. You didn't back down. You don't realize how much that means. Some came from females. Some came from people who had always suspected that the weight wasn't being distributed equally but had never been stopped. Lena, I read them all, but I only answered a handful. Applause didn't interest her. She wanted to see things through to the end. One email in particular caught our attention. It originated from A. The black sergeant was in a nearby county. He wrote, "Every morning, my niece travels through that neighborhood to get to, it's not justice yet, but it's a change from telling her to keep her head down to telling her to keep a dash cam. Begin." Since it served as a reminder, Lena printed that one and taped it inside her locker. There was more to what transpired that morning than a single stop. It had to do with the unseen script incorporated into sidewalks, into quiet, into what certain neighborhoods were permitted to experience. Others were policed and others were protected. It required a covert camera, a federal badge, and a great deal of silent perseverance to validate what thousands had already discovered. Even so, she was aware that it was insufficient. However, there was motion. Lena was standing outside her lavatory. Mirror. Hours after the end of the day, the jacket was still on and the tie was undone. The only sound coming from the flat was the faint hum of the city against the window. It didn't feel heroic to her. Shouldn't even consider themselves winners. She sensed a colder sensation, something more consistent, a feeling of moral significance at last being acknowledged, but raised. For the 100th time, she mentally reenacted the stop, not because she had second thoughts about what she had done, but she knew how close it had been torn a different way. What if she had moved or spoken more rapidly? What if had she cracked her voice? Had she not been an FBI agent? She was most haunted by that last one. She considered every driver who would not possess the badge. The privilege of being believed or the recording? For each Lena Whitaker who possesses, she was one of thousands of women with federal credentials. The same skin, voice, and zip code who was never able to submit a video and who was never seen their video became official policy. She understood that justice didn't always appear to be a courtroom. At times, it appeared as though a document had been silently refiled. At times, it appeared as though a brand new training video had been distributed to 1,000 email addresses. It appeared at times as though a man was being made to reconsider a choice he had previously believed to be innocuous. However, justice is real. Justice, it had to be more profound. It required a different kind of imagination. It was not dependent on the badge bearer. It was not dependent on who was holding the camera. It must have been ingrained in the instincts of those who pledged to defend. The following morning, Lena arrived early for work. She was wearing the same jacket she had on when she was stopped that day, but she pinned a tiny lapel under the collar this time. It wasn't typical problem. It was a present from a coworker who had seen the video and just she entered the room and said, "You reminded me what this abise is supposed to be?" Conference room and displayed the most recent training module draft. The clip was narrated by her now calm, measured voice. She didn't act furious. She carried out accountability. She pressed the play button. The pause was displayed on the screen. The quiet, "Do you mind if I look inside the car?" she asked, her voice steady. "Ice is a search justified by law?" Although it was subtle, there was a change. Fairness failed to roar in that video. It was honest, but no one was arrested, and that was sufficient for now. She was happy to know the next officer for the time being to view this video in order to hear her voice before repeating the same error. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be different. Something, justice, we tell ourselves, is blind and does not perceive a person's skin color or badge or locality. However, what if justice isn't blind? What if it notices everything and just decides where to search? Lena Whitaker remained silent. She was not a rank player. In the mirror, she allowed the system to catch itself. Additionally, when it flinched, this was not a case of a law being broken. It concerned Aberkan routine, the inclination to question, halt, and exercise authority when none was required. It focused on the more subdued ways that dignity is tested, people defend themselves. So, tonight, consider this. In a nation where silence is what is required for survival in order to communicate without raising your